Alright. I want to start by looking at a picture. Thank you, Mark. Alright. So tell me what you see in this picture.
It's a face.
It is a face, yes. Is the face old or young? Is it an old face or a young face?
Yeah.
Young?
Old.
Alright, who can see a young face? Who can see an old face? Alright, so it is both. Both are there. For those who cannot make it out, the old lady, that is the tip of her nose, that is her chin, that is her mouth. The young lady, that is her chin, this is her cheekbone, that's her ear, and that's her necklace. So both, it is a young lady and it is an old lady, both are true. And the fact that you can see one or the other is purely a matter of perspective. And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit tonight, is perspective. How in the Bible you can have a story and on the surface it can mean one thing, but with Revelation it actually can mean something else as well. It's only a shower. Okay, so for instance, the story in the book of Genesis about Abraham sacrificing his son, Isaac. If you can read that as just a story that actually happened thousands of years ago, and that is a correct view of that story. You read it and it's about Isaac, Abraham's only beloved son, the long-awaited fulfillment of God's covenant with Abraham, the prophesied source of his blessing. And Isaac is obediently following his father up a hill near what would be Jerusalem, carrying the wood that he's about to be sacrificed on. Now, if you look at that story through the lens of the New Testament, you can see that that's a prophetic retelling of another story from the New Testament that is familiar to us all. The New Testament brings to an Old Testament story a greater meaning. Seeing it from this other perspective does not negate or deny the original story, it simply increases the significance to us as a New Testament living church, living under God's new promises. So that's my aim tonight, is I'm going to take an Old Testament poem and look at it through the lens of the New Testament, and hopefully we'll see a picture of something that is happening but is not yet finished. Alright, so the passage that I'm looking at tonight has often been used to hold people to an Old Testament standard. But I hope that looking at it through this New Testament lens or perspective, it will reveal a greater meaning of hope and anticipation. The poem that I'm looking at is titled "The Wife of Noble Character," found in Proverbs 31. And before you all tune out, gentlemen, this is not a pink scripture, as I've heard some people refer to it. We know from Paul, writing in 2 Timothy, that all scripture is God-breathed and is written for the benefit of all believers. Plus, if you look within the context of Proverbs 31, it is written to a man. So this is not just for ladies tonight, it is for all of us. I will start with Proverbs 31 verse 10, and it will be on the screen. An excellent wife who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. Good start. Alright, now, in the Old Testament sense that we're looking at, the most literal translation that we have there, it is talking about an earthly wife. But the funny thing about translation is that sometimes, in fact quite often, words don't translate exactly from one language to another. So a modern suggestion that you will be familiar with is the Greeks have 6 different words for love. So if I was to translate the word love from English into Greek, I would have to go through and work out from the context of the sentence which love it meant when I was translating it into Greek. And so that is what the translators of the Bible have done when translating these scriptures from Hebrew or Greek into English, is they've used the context of the rest of the passage and they've translated the word to the closest one that they can find in English that has a similar meaning to what they think the original author was trying to get at. And so obviously, in an Old Testament setting, that makes quite a lot of sense. But if you look at some of the words, they do have different meanings in English that are still true depending on the context. So for example, the word excellent there, or in some translations it would be noble or virtuous. It's a very flexible word. It has a wide variety of meanings. So it can mean, and so throughout the Old Testament it has been translated, depending on the context, as capable, able, valiant, wealthy, worthy, excellent, noble, strong, powerful, mighty, ready for war, an army or a warrior. All come from the one original Hebrew word, which is pronounced something like hayil. And it is quite often actually used to describe an army as or warriors that are about to go into battle. They are armed and they are ready to fight. So an excellent wife could also be a capable wife, a wealthy wife, a worthy wife, a mighty, ready for war wife. The word worthy or precious in that translation is exactly what it sounds. It's what someone is willing to pay for something. The value or price of something. And the word jewels there can also be pearls or rubies, so it means literal jewels. So he's talking about paying for someone with jewels, which in our day and age is quite an unusual thing to do, to be paying for your wife. But in certain cultures around the world now, and certainly back in this time, it was the customary thing to do, that the husband's family would pay a dowry to the bride's family. And we find examples of this in the Bible. So Isaac, who I talked about earlier, when he was ready to be married, his father Abraham sent a servant out to find a wife. And the servant found Rebecca. And in Genesis 24:53, we hear that the servant of Abraham brought out gold and silver and jewellery and articles of clothing and gave them to Rebecca, and he also gave costly gifts to her family. So there are actually 2 payments there that we see in Israeli tradition. There's the mohar, which is the dowry paid from the father of the groom to the father of the bride, and there is the matan, which is a gift from the bride, a gift for the bride from the groom. So 2 different things there, but it is an example of this jewels or rubies or pearls or precious stones being paid for someone. And the significant thing is, the mohar is not just a token gift. It's not just like, oh yes, here's some jewels that will help pay for the wedding or whatever. Because the family of the bride lost a valuable worker, okay, so Rebecca's family, they were shepherds, so Rebecca would be out helping with the sheep and that sort of thing, and because she was leaving her father's house to be married to Isaac, she was no longer a valuable worker in the household. And so the mohar, this payment to the bride's family was actually the equivalent of her wages, what she contributed to the family for the remainder of her life. So it was not insignificant. So if we take those meanings, those that New Testament interpretation of Proverbs 31:10, instead of reading that, you could actually read, "Who could find a wife like this one? A woman full of strength and power and mighty valour, a warrior full of wealth and wisdom. The price that was paid for her was far greater than many jewels." And when I read it in that context, I get a different picture, not of an earthly bride, but of the bride that we, the church, are to become. Because we are people of strength and power and mighty valour, and the price that was paid for us by the groom was far greater than many jewels. That is the point that I'm going to get across tonight. We read on, "The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain." Now, heart here, I'll attempt not to get into too much Hebrew, but it is difficult. The heart here is not just love. He doesn't just love her. It's his heart. It's not his physical heart. It is, we see the same word in Psalm 84, where it says, "My heart and flesh cry out." And the context of that is the heart is the opposite of the flesh. So you've got the flesh, which is your outer man, and you've got your heart, which represents your inner man, your soul man, your spirit man. So the bridegroom trusts the inner man, the inner being, the spirit of her husband, trusts in her completely. And he will have no lack of gain. That word gain comes from the Hebrew shalal, which is translated once as gain in the Old Testament. However, it is used 57 other times in the Old Testament to represent spoils, as in the spoils of war, or plunder, or booty. Items won in battle. So the inner being of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of the spoils of war. Proverbs 12 is Proverbs 12 is fairly straightforward, and I think it applies to both an Old Testament wife and a New Testament spiritual bride. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. We will move on from that. Verse 13, "She seeks wool and flax and works willingly with hands," or with her hands. Now, obviously seeking wool and flax, that was a big part of Old Testament culture, because that's what they used to make their clothing and that sort of thing. They couldn't just pop down to Target and buy a new sweater. They would have to make it themselves, or they would make it to sell to other people. But from a New Testament point of view, that doesn't really apply a lot to our daily lives. We're not out there seeking wool and flax a lot. So what could it mean? How can we apply this to us as the bride of Christ? Well, in the Old Testament, we can see that literally wool and flax would represent wool and flax. But we see throughout the Old Testament that wool and flax can represent other things. So wool, in the book of Isaiah, represents purity, where it says that you will be washed white as wool. Represents purity, and flax is the same word as linen. We see throughout the book of Leviticus, when they're setting up the rules for the priests had to wear linen because it represented righteousness or holiness in the priests, and when they entered the tabernacle, or later on when they entered the temple, they had to wear linen to represent their purity. So she seeks purity and holiness or righteousness. And the word seeks there is not a one-time action. The Hebrew word means to continually seek, to search, to investigate, to practice, or to study. It's not something that you just do once. It's like, oh yeah, I've got my purity and my holiness, I'm good to go. It's something that you are progressively working on. So she continually seeks that which is pure and righteous and she works with willing hands. Verse 14. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. Once again, this applies literally in the Old Testament, but for us, we don't have to travel for our food any further than Woolworths. But the thing about merchant ships, if you think back to biblical times when this was written, the merchant ships were ships that would bring you food and supplies that you couldn't normally get. So, in the nation of Israel where they were, there were some crops that they would grow themselves, and they would just have to go down to Farmer John down the road and they could buy their meat or whatever. But there were other things that they would have to ship in from afar. And so that's what this is. She's like the ships of the merchant, bringing food from afar. And food here, in the Old Testament, it also means bread, which from the New Testament point of view, of course, we have our daily bread, our spiritual nourishment, our daily supply from God that we get, our divine provision. So she continually seeks that which is pure and righteous. Sorry, that was wrong. So she's like a ship or a courier or a messenger bringing divine supply from the merchant to those who need it. Verse 15, she rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. The word rise here, once again, like the word seek, it's not something passive. It's not just up she gets. It's to arise, become powerful, stand and endure. Once again, it's often used in military terms when an army would rise. It's rising with power. The word night, again in the Old Testament point of view, it is literally night. She would get up in the night, which back then was a lot harder because you couldn't just flick a light switch and have light come on and turn a knob and have the oven heat up. You know, it was a big deal for her. For us, in the New Testament, I would say this represents the night seasons of our life when things are hard, where it feels like we can't just flick a switch and, receive from God. When things are hard for us, we still need to get up and provide food. Again, spiritual food, not literal food. Proverbs makes a distinct... in my translation, it makes a distinction between her... I don't know why it's not on the screen. Anyway, in my Bible, it says that she provides food for her household and portions for her maidservants. It makes a distinction there between sort of the upper class and the lower class, if you like. Those she's close to, her household, which would be her family, and those that are at arm's length, servants down there. And servants were a different class. Sometimes they are a different nationality, because that's how servants worked back then. So she provides for those who she is close to and those who are socially or economically different from her. Proverbs 16. She considers the field and buys it, and with the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. Again, this would apply to the Old Testament sense of view. Having a woman go out and do that would be a big thing back in that day, and a sign of a strong spiritual woman. But for us, going out and buying a field and planting a vineyard doesn't seem like such a big deal, certainly from our spiritual point of view, which is where we're approaching this. But again, if you go back to the Hebrew, the word considers, when she considers a field, is to fix one's thoughts upon it. So log that. A field. Now, the term for a field is not so much just a field or a paddock or anything. It's simply a piece of land with a distinct border. So a field, a distinct border would be the fence around a field, but it could also suggest a, it could also suggest a territory, or the land associated with a certain tribe, or even a nation which had a distinct political border around it. And the word buys, she buys it. I'm not going to suggest that you go and buy a nation or a tribe tonight. The Hebrew word lakoch, which is translated here as buy, and it's translated 3 times throughout the Old Testament as buy, but 352 times it is translated as to take, or to claim, or to carry it with you. So we put all of that together, and it would say she fixes her thoughts upon a nation or a community, she claims it, and she carries it with her. And with the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. Now, in the New Testament point of view, we know who the vineyard is, don't we? So, when I read that, someone who fixes her thoughts upon a nation or a community or a group of people, claims it, carries it within her, and then works with the fruit of her hands there and plants the living vine, I can think of an example of someone from this church who is the living example of that, and that would be Lynn Barnes with her work in Tanzania. She has claimed that community and she carries it with her anywhere she goes, and many times she's gone over there and laboured to plant the living vine there. And even when she's back here in Australia, she is still labouring so that she can support them and go back there and plant the living vine. And that's something that we can all do. It doesn't have to be with a nation or with a community over in Tanzania. It could be claiming your street for Christ and carrying that with you wherever you go. Or it could be your community, or it could be somewhere else in Australia or overseas that God lays on your heart that you carry with you. Verse 17, she dresses herself, or some translations say she girds herself with strength, and she makes her arms strong. The word dresses, or girds is rather an archaic term, and yet it pops up in the Australian national anthem. And basically it just means surrounded. So in the national anthem, it's our home is girt by seas, which just means that we're surrounded by seas, we're an island nation. And that's what it means here. She surrounds herself with strength. And the word strength obviously appears twice. She surrounds herself with strength and she makes her arms strong. And they are 2 different words in Hebrew. So the first one, where she surrounds herself with strength, is the word oz, and it actually translates to be a mighty fortress. In the Old Testament. In the New Testament, it's a mighty fortress, but with capital letters. So she surrounds herself with a mighty fortress. And the second time that the word strength is used is she makes her arms strong. And it suggests both physical and mental strength. So she surrounds herself with a mighty fortress, and she strengthens herself physically and mentally. Verse 18. The rain has held off. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. The word merchandise there is a very specific word in Hebrew, which is tov, and it is translated here as merchandise. The word profitable there is tob in Hebrew. And here it's profitable, but it is used 7 times in the first chapter of Genesis. And it translates good. It is good. She knows, she perceives that her merchandise, what she does, what she makes with her hands, her works, are good. And her lamp does not go out at night. Verse 19, she puts her hand to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. Once again, not something that probably comes up in most of our day-to-day lives, is the old distaff and spindle. They are used for spinning thread, which would be used to make cloth. So you had the distaff, which was sort of a large pole that you hold in one hand, and it sort of had the raw fibre on it. And then you had the spindle, which is a smaller stick that you would actually twist to actually make the thread. So you may have seen a spinning wheel. That's sort of just a modern version of the distaff and spindle. And the spindle is still used in a spinning wheel. And so once again, these two instruments were used with flax and wool, which we've seen earlier. And we worked out they can represent purity and righteousness to us in an era with cotton and synthetics. And the same as a lot of the other verses that we've read tonight, and some more that we'll get to, it speaks of a very physical labour. You know, the Proverbs 31 woman in the Old Testament was a hard worker. And we've heard before her speaking of her maidservant, so she has a staff, not a distaff, but servants. But we still see her leading the example here with the distaff and the spindle. So she's not afraid of hard work, and her pure and righteous works become an example to those around her. Her servants see that she is working hard, and that drives them to work just as hard for her. Verse 20. She opens her hands to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. Once again, both the word open and reaches, these are not passive things. This is an action. This is an action word. The word opens is most often used throughout the Old Testament when it's actually describing cherubim's wings, that they open, that they surround people or things. So it's a very active thing that she opens her hands willingly and generously to the poor and reaches out her hands to those in need. An example of this in action that I read about this week, and this is a true story. I read it on a secular news site and looked at several other sources to make sure that it was accurate. In October 2018, so just a couple of years ago, in the Netherlands, an Armenian family of refugees who had been living there coming on 9 years, but they were facing deportation due to some red tape. But in the Netherlands, it is illegal for police to enter a church service whilst it is in progress. So their local church held a church service for them, which gave them time to legally arrange to stay in the country which they now call home. Because of the time it took to get all those legal proceedings in place, the service ran for 24 hours. For 96 days. Over 1,000 priests and pastors from dozens of different denominations across the Netherlands, Belgium and Germany all volunteered to take a shift to have an active church service around the clock for this one family. Overwhelming, extravagant generosity, reaching out to those in need. Verse 21. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed in scarlet. Again, bringing that into our day and age, it may feel like it's going to snow sometimes, but currently you don't have a great fear of snow here. And I'm not sure scientifically what wearing red had to do with keeping you warm from the snow. But, you know, I'm wearing a red shirt tonight, so maybe it will help. But obviously, bringing it into our day and age, snow, if you like, is winter in action. And so for us, it's when everything's against us. It's when we have opposition in action. But here, she is not afraid of it, because her household is clothed in scarlet. And obviously, when we hear about people being clothed or covered in scarlet, we think of two examples, one from the Old Testament and one from the New Testament, either Passover or obviously the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, which covers us in scarlet. So we do not have to be afraid of snow or opposition in action. Moving along. She makes her bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. The word bed coverings there, if you're reading from other translations, it may say tapestries, and that is in fact correct. The translation there should read, she makes tapestries for herself. Now, a tapestry is somewhat different from just a sheet, because tapestries are designed to not just be practical. They did have a practical use. They were put on the walls and things, which helped with insulation and all of that before the days of air conditioning. But they're also designed to be beautiful. They're designed to show off a person's skill and art and dedication and their position. Because not everyone could afford to have a tapestry, because obviously in poor households you did not have the time to sit around with a needle and thread and make yourself a beautiful tapestry, because you were out working in the fields. And it says her clothing is from fine linen. Once again, linen was a bit of an upper class material back in the day because of the expense. And purple dyes back in the day were again quite expensive. But it says that her clothing is made of this. So what this means to me in a New Testament sense is that she knows her station. She knows who her husband is, and she's not afraid to show that. She's not trying to hide the fact that her husband is wealthy, because she's displaying it in her tapestries and in her clothing and in her day-to-day life. You could say she knows her station as the bridegroom of the king, and outwardly she displays it in her works. The next verse. Her husband is well known in the gates, where he sits among the elders of the land. Now, the gates of the city, back in the day, this is often where judgment was held. It was their courtroom. So the fact that he's known at the gates means that he's a well-known, well-respected member of the community. He sits among the elders of the land. The elders of the land would normally be the ones to judge people. So if you had a dispute, you would go and you would see the elders. You would see the judges. So this is suggesting that her husband is famous and admired by all, and he is sitting as a judge of the people. And we certainly know that our bridegroom fits that category. The next verse, verse 24, she makes linen garments and sells them, and she delivers sashes to the merchant. Once again, we have linen popping up again, which is holiness and righteousness. And we have the word merchant popping up again. We had that back in verse 14. And in English, they are both merchant, but in Hebrew, they are distinctly different words. The word merchant here is actually, I'll try and say this right, Kenani, which sounds similar to and is the same as our English word Canaanite. A Canaanite, or an inhabitant of Canaan, and the reason why we have merchant here is because the Canaanites and their close neighbours, the Ishmaelites, often worked as peddlers. So they would sort of go door to door selling goods and wares and things. So that's why we have merchant here, because from an Old Testament point of view, it makes sense that she delivers sashes to the peddlers. But it's actually to the Canaanites, which, if you know biblical politics a little bit, you would know that the Canaanites were not on good terms with the Israelites most of the time. In fact, devout Israelites would see the Canaanites as their enemy. So she does these works of righteousness and holiness, and she sells them to people in her community, but she also delivers them to her enemy. Which, if you bring that into our day and age, that's quite an interesting statement. Verse 25, strength and dignity are her clothing. That translates pretty well for us. We are surrounded by strength and dignity, which obviously does not come from us. And she laughs at the time to come. Time to come, quite literally, if you do a literal translation from Hebrew, it's time to come is days last, the last days. She's wrapped in strength and dignity, and she laughs at the last days because she has nothing to fear about the last days. I'm going to read through the next little bit as well. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teachings of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. So, again, we've seen all throughout this passage, she's not a lazy wife. Or from our point of view, you could say that she's not a pew warmer. She's out there busy in her household and in the community, and as far as her arms reach, she is busy. She is not eating the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her, and he says, many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. So give her the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. So it says a lot. Just going back to verse 29. Many women have done, this is what her husband says about her, many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. And we bring that to a New Testament point of view, and it's our bridegroom telling us that many have done great works, but you have surpassed them all. Or, to quote from the New Testament, truly I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater works than these will they do. You will do great works, and you will surpass them. Just jumping back to the first verse of this poem once again. An excellent wife who can find. The word for can find there in Hebrew is morsor, which I'm not pronouncing right, I'm certain. But it is found, again, it's found multiple times throughout the Old Testament. In the book of Genesis, where all of the animals come to Adam and he's naming them, it says at the end of that, but for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him. The perfect partner for him was not found. It's that same word. Later on in the book of Genesis, we hear the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham argues with God, if you can find 50 people, save the city, but God could not find 50 people. If you can find 40, 30, 20, 10 people, but God could not find 40, 30, 20 or 10 people. It's something that's not possible. In the Old Testament, you could not find a wife that fitted this checklist. And it's much like the laws in the Old Testament. You had the Mosaic laws, the laws set about in the time of Moses, and they were very hard to follow. You would have to be constantly being aware of what the laws were, reminding yourself of the laws and making sure that you lived up to the law. But then we come to the New Testament and Jesus says, well, if you think badly about your brother, it's like you murdered him. He kind of took the laws at this level and he put it to that level. He went, well, you've had trouble with the laws, let's make it impossible. Because then he came and he did the impossible. He did away with the laws and he brought about a new system of how we can be righteous with God. And that's very much my point tonight about the Proverbs 21 woman. It is not a checklist for women. And from a New Testament point of view, it is not a checklist for us as the church, as the bride of Christ. A Proverbs 31 church is impossible to achieve on our own merit. It is not a goal that we're constantly trying to aim for. It is a picture of the bride the church is becoming, not because of what we do, not because of what we are constantly trying to do, but because of what he has done for us and because of what he is doing within us. To quote Paul in Ephesians, he says, "Marriage is the beautiful design of the Almighty, a great and sacred mystery, a vivid example of Christ and his church. For he died for us, sacrificing himself to make us holy and pure, cleansing us through the pure water of the Word of God. All that he does in us is designed to make us a mature church for his pleasure, until we become a source of praise to him, holy and without blemish." This is something that we don't have to worry about. That all we have to do is believe in him and walk with him. And this is something that he does within us. We are, as a church, as the global church, we are becoming his perfect bride. We are becoming a Proverbs 31 church. So, taking all of that, I have a new version of Proverbs 31, the New Testament version of Proverbs 31, which I like to read. And again, this is not a checklist. This is not a chance for you to sit there and go, yep, I'm doing that, I'm doing that, I'm not doing that, I'm not doing that, I'm doing that. This is an encouragement. This is a hope, because this is what he is doing in you. This is the perfect you, the perfect church that you are transforming into. So please receive it as that. If you want to close your eyes, that's fine. Or if you want to pay attention or take notes or whatever, that's fine as well. I will just read this through. Proverbs 31, a church of noble character. This is your future, the active church you are becoming, the radiant bride the bridegroom is returning for. You are a people of strength and power and mighty valour. You are warriors full of wealth and wisdom. Your value is more precious than pearls, and your worth is far, far above rubies. The price your Messiah paid for you was far greater than mere jewels. Whoever can be trusted with a little can also be trusted with much, and your Saviour trusts you with his entire inner being. He will not want for the spoils of war, for as you go through life, you bring him what is good, not evil. You continually seek that which is pure, true, noble, excellent and praiseworthy, and you work towards it with genuine joy. You are like a courier, bringing divine supply from the provider to anyone who needs it. Even when the night is at its darkest, you arise and shine, and God's glory streams from you, and you provide for those near and far. You have set your thoughts upon a nation. You claim it and you carry it in your heart. You labour there to plant the living vine. You are surrounded by his mighty fortress, and there you strengthen yourself, body, soul, and spirit, so you can achieve many great works. Whatever you do, you work at it with all your heart. You know your work is good and pleasing in your Maker's eyes, and your lamp cannot go out at night. You are not afraid of hard work. Your pure, righteous works are an example to those around you. You are known for your extravagant generosity to the poor. You look after the orphans and widows in their distress, always reaching out your hands to those in need. You are not afraid of tribulation, for you are covered and protected by your Redeemer. You know who you are, and you know whose you are, and you are not afraid or ashamed to demonstrate this in all you do. Your beloved is famous and admired by all, and sits as the esteemed judge of his people. Your works of righteousness benefit those with you and those against you. Strength and dignity surround you, and you laugh with joy over the latter days. Your teachings are filled with wisdom that comes from heaven, and loving instructions pour from your lips. You watch over your fellow believers and meet any need they have. Those close to you arise to extol your virtues. Your Saviour King arises to speak of you in glowing terms, saying, "There are many valiant and noble ones, but you have ascended above them all. I could have chosen any from among the vast multitudes, but I chose you." Charm can be misleading, and earthly beauty will quickly fade. But you who live in wonder, awe, and fear of the Lord will be praised throughout eternity. Your loving works of righteousness deserve to be admired in the gateway of every city. You are the transformed, mature church, a source of praise to your Saviour, glorious and radiant, beautiful and holy, without fault or flaw. Thank you, Father God, that you are transforming us into the church that you have envisioned for us. Thank you, God, that every day as we walk with you, you are drawing us closer to you and shaping us to become your future bride. Thank you, God, that as we go out into our week this week, that you will remind us that this is who we are. And thank you that it's not on us to do this. Thank you, God, that you sent your Son to die for us, so that all we have to do is say yes to him and walk with him, and you will do this for us. Thank you, God, that as we go out this week, you remind us that this is what you have promised us, that we are your valiant bride. Amen.